Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 episode number 83 based on novel. So let's start. Wang Donga turned around and rolled her eyes at him. That sassiness was so enchanting it was suffocating. Are you that unconfident in me? I have absolute faith in you, though. If you don't believe me, you can ask everyone. She smiled faintly after she spoke, and continued walking towards Wang Choa. Wang Donga stopped walking in before Wang Choa. Wang Choa's eyes seemed like they had melted before this, but they were instantly sealed in ice once more as she stared coldly at Wang Donga and remained silent. Wang Donga was also staring back at her. She gradually bent down and bowed like that at Wang Choa in front of everyone's watchful eyes. I'm sorry, Choa. I am apologizing to you sincerely for how unreasonable I was before this and how I've antagonized you. Everything was my fault, and I hope you can forgive me. Hua Yuhao drew in a cold breath as he thought to himself, Donga, what game are you trying to play? Hua Yuhao had known how arrogant and prideful Wang Donga was ever since the first day they had met. Even though this pride was rarely displayed as they grew older, it was still deeply imprinted into her bones. Yet, she was willing to bow toward Wang Choa for forgiveness at this moment, willing to bow to a girl that she had perceived with so much hostility before. What was happening? Hua Yuhao wasn't the only one who was astounded. Everyone in Shrek Academy shared the same surprise, but only Cai Maya gave Wang Donga her silent approval. This girl is indeed smart. Wang Choa stared at the bowing Wang Donga and was equally shocked. She was momentarily stunned before she said, You've never done anything to me, and you don't need to ask me for forgiveness. If you are doing this because I saved his life, then it's even more unnecessary. He saved me before, and I was just returning the favor. Wang Donga said sincerely, No. I've always been rejecting you in my heart, and I'm apologizing to you because of that. This has nothing to do with Hua Yuhao. Of course, you saved his life, and I am extremely thankful for what you did, as his girlfriend. If there's anything you need us to do in the future, we will help you out to the best of our ability, no matter what. Wang Choa waved her hand and said, It's all right, let bygones be bygones. I've said this already, he doesn't owe me anything. Wang Donga came up beside her and touched her arm as she said softly, If you're willing to listen, I can tell you our story, and then you will understand why I harbored that hostility against you before this. Let me escort you back to rest. Wang Choa hesitated for a moment before nodding softly. Hua Yuhao looked on with slack jaw and stunned eyes as Wang Donga helped Wang Choa back into his tent, and even sealed the tent's entrance. Hua Yuhao didn't know what to do. Han Ruoruo came up beside him and giggled. So, are you nervous? Does it feel exciting? Hua Yuhao forced a laugh and said, I'm absolutely nervous, but excitement, maybe a little too overwhelming. The two of them, Han Ruoruo laughed and said, That's what you get for flirting with girls everywhere. You're not satisfied with Donga, and you end up flirting with Choa as well. Donga really has a big heart. When we were searching for the two of you yesterday, you were lying on the ground so unglamorously, while Wang Choa was lying on your thighs. Her clothes had been torn to pieces, and she was wearing your clothes. If Donga had been someone else, that person would probably have been infuriated. Do you know what she said? Hua Yuhao's curiosity was immediately piqued. What did she say? Han Ruoruo said, Donga said she trusts you. The truth is that I could tell that she was extremely sad because you were hurt, and because you were with Wang Choa. I could read the look in her eyes. She would rather she herself be the one that was heinously wounded rather than see you with another woman in your most difficult of times. She must be feeling very dejected inside. This isn't about envy or jealousy, this is about her not being able to help you. Hua Yuhao's eyes grew solemn. Donga, how can I love you to return the affection you have for me? Han Ruoruo whispered, Hey, you haven't actually done anything to betray Donga, have you? Hua Yuhao immediately tossed his head from side to side without hesitation. Absolutely not. She's the only girl in my heart. No matter how much Wang Choa looks like her, Donga will always be Donga in my heart, and Choa will always be Choa. Han Ruoruo laughed and said, Heh, righteous word. It seems like Donga's decision to trust you isn't wrong. In the end, you have to treat Donga as nicely as you can, and even I won't let this go if you don't. Donga is such a good girl, yes. Hua Yuhao nodded in vigorous agreement. An exclamation could be heard not far from where they were. This was the Great Star-Do Forest, and danger could arrive at any moment. Han Ruoruo was still talking to Hua Yuhao in the previous moment, but a golden beam of light stretched out in the next and immediately wrapped around Li Yongyu and Mo Xian, who were not too far away. It's all right. It's good news, Li Yongyu shouted. Mo Xian turned around with a look of excitement. We've discovered soul bones. Real soul bones. It's a left thigh bone. He raised a shiny purple thigh bone into the air as he spoke and waved it in the sky. A dark purple color released brilliant shadows as it sparkled. Mo Xian and Li Yongyu had been going through the wolf ape's corpses for the two little dark golden terraclaw bears when they discovered intense soul power undulations. They were both elites from Shrek Academy's inner courtyard, and they immediately realized what was going on. They followed the soul power undulations and quickly discovered this wolf ape's left thigh bone. Soul bones were extremely rare treasures, much more valuable compared to soul rings. The 3 wolf apes were mutants, but they were still soul beasts with at least 10,000 years of cultivation. Every soul bone had a single soul skill, except for 100,000-year soul bones, but soul beasts would always produce stronger soul bones the more powerful they were. Even a single soul bone like that had immeasurable value. Lee Yongyu handed the soul bone to Cai Maya after returning to the company, and everyone's eyes glazed over. This left thigh bone was emanating a faint purplish-black light, and there were hints of silver light flickering within. Hua Yuhao was the most surprised when he saw it. He realized, to his intense surprise, that this left thigh bone wasn't a darkness type. The soul bone was releasing purplish-black colors, but there was a stronger aura on top of that, and it belonged to spatial undulations. This meant that the left thigh bone's element was in line with the 3 wolf apes' spatial element. He thought about their instant teleportation ability, and Hua Yuhao's heart began to palpitate. If this soul bone contained that ability, a thought crossed his mind when he thought about this, and he said, "What about the other 2? Have you checked them out, seniors?" Hua Yuhao and Wang Donga were the youngest in the company, so everyone else was a senior to them. Li Yongyu and Mo Xian immediately understood what he was trying to say. They exchanged a look and said, "We can't be that lucky, can we?" Hua Yuhao replied meaningfully, 3-way martial soul fusion skill. They didn't need Cai Maya to instruct them, and they exclaimed at almost the same time as they separately pounced on the other 2 carcasses. Hua Yuhao had already blown one of them into smithereens before this. Yes, there's actually another one. Li Yongyu was the first to declare the good news. He didn't have to check the other carcass, but instead found the second soul bone among the bloody parts in the vegetation. Furthermore, it was another left thigh bone, identical to the previous one. It didn't take long before Mo Xian exclaimed excitedly, "I also have one. This is just great, it's a left thigh bone too." After another moment, 3 identical soul bones that released purplish-black auras and flickering with silver light appeared before Cai Maya. Cai Maya was full of awe as she stared at these 3 identical soul bones. Even though she wasn't like Hua Yuhao and hadn't guessed the soul skills that these soul bones contained, she knew that these identical soul bones could be fused together to forge an entirely new soul bone. 3 together would be a lot more valuable than they were alone, and even she couldn't value these 3 bones. Furthermore, there was no need to give that estimate, Yuhao. Cai Maya called out, "I'm here." Hua Yuhao hurriedly acknowledged. He was starting to feel waves of weakness once more, especially about what Wang Donga and Wang Choa were whispering in the tent on the other side. That gave him a lot of psychological pressure, and the distraction made him even weaker. Cai Maya passed the 3 soul bones to him and said, "Keep them, ah?" Hua Yuhao was taken aback. "What are you doing, Dean Cai? These soul bones belong to everyone. How can you give them all to me?" Cai Maya shook her head and said, "This is not a group prize. They belong to you and Wang Choa. You 2 were the ones that killed those wolf apes. We didn't do a single thing." Hua Yuhao hurriedly tried to dispute her words. "But if not for your protection and the help of the company, we wouldn't have been able to venture so deep into the Great Star Do Forest." Naturally, Cai Maya stuffed the 3 soul bones into his hands. "Stop talking about all that. If not for you and Choa, I'm not even sure what the final outcome would have been like. The 2 of you are the Academy's prized students, so these 3 soul bones belong to you in the first place." Hua Yuhao thought for a moment, then said, "How about this? I'll keep 1 soul bone, and I'll give 1 to Wang Choa. We will donate the remaining 1 to the Academy." It could be said that Hua Yuhao and Wang Choa had risked their lives to kill the 3 wolf apes to obtain these soul bones, but Hua Yuhao knew better than to be selfish and take everything for himself. It was better with Zhong Lashuan and Han Ruoruo, but Li Yongyu and Mo Xian had a look of envy on their faces. Cai Maya hesitated for a while before she nodded and said, "All right. You can keep them for now, and you can donate the last one directly to the Martial Soul Department after we return to the Academy. You don't have to give it to me." "All right." Hua Yuhao acknowledged her words before he put the 3 soul bones away. He had something to eat before he drank a few gulps of water and returned to the tent. Cai Maya had already made her decision. Everyone was to stay here for an entire day so that everyone could adjust themselves and rest up, and everyone was to wait for Hua Yuhao and Wang Choa to recover before continuing on their journey. There was nothing more important than her students' safety. Cai Maya was a little hasty to return to the Academy after what had just happened so that she could report this issue with the 3 brothers to Shrek's guardians. The 3 brothers' existence was an unimaginable threat to the world of Soul Masters, and they would definitely ascend to become titled Doluor in the future. In addition to their abilities to manipulate and imprison beast souls, they were likely to become a great calamity for the world of Soul Masters. This was the reason Cai Maya had decided to join the operation initially. She was going to try her best to help Hua Yuhao and Li Yongyu obtain soul rings suitable for them before they returned to Shrek Academy as quickly as possible. Her students had been tested too many times on this expedition. Hua Yuhao was sitting cross-legged in his tent. He would have long gone into meditation by now if it had just been a normal day, but he was a little unsettled because Wang Donga still hadn't returned. He kept thinking to himself, what will Wang Donga say to Wang Chua? What will Wang Chua say to Wang Donga? He had avoided relaying some key facts when he had recounted his experience the previous day. What if Wang Chua spills the beans? What will Donga think? There's so many complicated and intertwined emotions. How could he enter meditation like that? On the other side, inside Hua Yuhao's tent, during the Sea God's fete on Sea God's Lake. It was so beautiful. Did you know? I was so nervous back then. Wang Donga vividly described her experiences with Hua Yuhao and what the two of them had gone through. Wang Chua was lying on her side and listening to Wang Donga. She didn't talk much, but she was listening very intently. What were you nervous about? Wang Chua suddenly asked. Wang Donga answered, how could I not be nervous? That fool had been with me for so many years, but he never knew that I was a girl. If he had known that I was a girl, who knows what he would have thought back then? What if he felt that I had been lying to him this whole time? What if he didn't like me? There were so many people back then, so how could I not be nervous? However, it was still quite exciting what happened next, and then Wang Donga recounted the events on the Sea God's Lake in detail, and Wang Chua's expressions would change at crucial parts. So, now you know. Our raiment of light was originally meant to be how I looked when I grew up, and he calls it the goddess of light. You look so much like me, and I was afraid that he only remembered this look, and not the person. This was the reason why I developed such intense hostility when I first met you. In the end, you look more like the goddess of light than I do. I only thought it out yesterday. If he only liked me because of my looks, then what meaning is there in his affection? Furthermore, I have faith in him. I should have faith in him. Will it not look like I'm insecure and I don't have any self-confidence otherwise? Therefore, I am truly sorry, and I am apologizing sincerely for all my childishness before this. Wang Chua's eyes changed a little as she stared at Wang Donga. Her eyebrows knitted, and emotions began to shift in her eyes. Only she knew what she was thinking. Wang Donga stared at her solemnly and said, are you willing to forgive me, Chua? Even though I have no clue why we look so alike, this is a form of fate in the end. I am sure that I don't have a sister that's living outside. However, we look so alike, and our names are so similar, why don't we address each other as sister from now on? Wang Chua muttered coldly, that's not necessary. There's nothing for me to forgive, and neither are we sisters. If you have nothing else to tell me, I want to rest. Wang Donga was slightly taken aback. She hadn't expected Wang Chua to be so cold. She had apologized sincerely with all her heart, but Wang Chua didn't seem like she wanted to accept it at all. However, she no longer harbored any hostility against Wang Chua, and so she stood up and said, all right. Even if we're not sisters, we're still schoolmates, and that's a fact that you can't change. You should have a good rest and take care of your body. I will take good care of Hua Yuhao, and thank you once more for saving him. She didn't wait for Wang Chua to rebut her, but pulled open the tent and slipped out before she closed it from the outside. Wang Chua's eyes suddenly became a little lost as she stared at the closed veil. She mumbled to herself, did she come to show her dominance? Does she really think that he belongs to her? Already 117 cuts. She suddenly blurted out a number. When she said this number, this girl that was always so tough and cold suddenly softened, and her eyes turned red as tears welled up in her eyes. Her tears finally trickled down her pale but incredibly beautiful face. I have his blood in my veins now. Hua Yuhao, you. Wang Donga came out of the tent and greeted her companions with a faint smile on her face before she arrived at Hua Yuhao's tent. When she lifted the veil and climbed in, she was met with Hua Yuhao's suspicious and doubtful eyes. Wang Donga smiled and said, why are you looking at me like that? Hua Yuhao coughed awkwardly and said, I am just wondering why you went to look for Wang Chua. Wang Donga answered, I was apologizing to her. I've thought it through. I don't have enough confidence in myself, and that's why I subconsciously developed this hostility towards her. However, I finally understood after you guys came back. I am so pretty, how can I be insecure, and how can I not have confidence in myself? You should be the one that should be insecure. Wang Chua also doesn't have anything for you at all. You don't have to make it sound so hurtful. Hua Yuhao muttered as he pulled a long face. The truth was that he didn't have much confidence in his looks, at least in comparison to Wang Donga and Wang Chua. Wang Donga spoke matter-of-factly, am I wrong? Stop trying to dispute it, this is the truth. You should hurry up and cultivate. I'll help you, so that you can recover as quickly as possible. Truth be told, I don't want to stay in this great Stardow forest for a second longer. Her eyes suddenly turned red as she said this. She stared at Hua Yuhao's feeble face, and she couldn't resist anymore as she slid gently into his embrace. Her soft body fell into his arms, and that faint fragrance that belonged to a young girl filled every corner of Hua Yuhao's heart and soul. It's so nice to have someone be concerned about you. Hua Yuhao hugged her tightly and whispered, I'm sorry, Donga. I will never make you so worried in the future. Wang Donga replied softly, you may not find yourself in such a dire situation anymore with your talent and your abilities. Your abilities determine your responsibility, and I know I can't stop you from doing some things that you must. However, I'm not a fragile porcelain vase. My only wish is that you will bring me along when you have to face danger and peril, and we will face them together. Okay, yes. Hua Yuhao acknowledged softly. He knew that it was unlikely that he would do so, but he still chose white lies and kind words during this heartwarming moment, as he couldn't bear to see her sad, not even a little bit. They rested for the entire day. Hua Yuhao recovered completely, and besides his spirit that still needed nurturing and repairing, everything else was back to normal. Wang Chua's recovery speed was equally impressive, possibly even more impressive than Hua Yuhao's. It was as if they were in a competition to see who could recover the fastest. When Wang Chua grasped her golden dragon spear and stood in front of the company, everyone was under the illusion that this girl had not been injured before. Whether or not she had recovered from her injuries, they couldn't tell from the outside anymore. They cleaned the campsite and packed up. It was time to move out again, and only Hua Yuhao and Li Yongyu needed more soul rings. Hua Yuhao's gaze met Wang Chua's when they saw each other again, and he nodded in her direction with a faint smile on his face. Wang Chua was expressionless, but she wasn't as cold as she had been before this, and she responded with a nod before she walked up to the vanguard. Stay in the center, Chua. Your injuries. Zhong Lashuan spoke up concernedly. Wang Chua shook her head and said, I'm fine. You need me to lead the way. I will stick closer to everyone. She still insisted that she had to lead the way, but one could tell from her tone that she hadn't fully recovered from her injuries. The formation didn't change, except Cai Maya was now openly anchoring the company at the back, so the group's overall strength had become a lot stronger. Wang Chua still took the lead as they resumed their journey. However, she was conspicuously slower than the past few days, and nobody urged her to go faster. They ventured deeper into the hybrid region, and were moving closer and closer to the core region, so slowing down wasn't a bad idea. Hua Yuhao activated his spiritual detection once more, and he continued with his responsibilities as the main control soul master. They had encountered many perils and dangers during this expedition into the Great Star Do Forest, but this adventure had sufficiently tested the students' abilities. It was needless to discuss Zhong Lashuan and Han Ruoruo. They were the oldest here, and they were no longer in the same age group as their juniors. Hua Yuhao and Wang Chua were undoubtedly the most outstanding ones among the others. Wang Chua's abilities seemed to be stronger, but everyone knew that they would have died without Hua Yuhao's spiritual detection. For example, when they were faced with the three brothers, the situation would have been drastically different if Hua Yuhao hadn't risked his life to steal the two baby dark golden terraclaw bears. Those two little fellows were also part of the company at this moment. However, they were treated very nicely. Hua Yuhao was carrying them both, one in each arm. It was a strange story. These two little bears ate enough meat and began to sleep, and they only woke up the next morning. They went to look for Hua Yuhao when they woke up, and climbed all over him as each one hugged one of his legs and just wouldn't let go. Their eyes that were like yellow beans rolling around in their sockets, and they were as stubborn as could be. Everybody thought that these two little bears treated Hua Yuhao like their father. Hua Yuhao had no choice but to take responsibility for taking care of them, and he became the temporary bear nanny. He carried a bear in each arm, but it was a little inconvenient even though it wasn't tiring. How could carrying two little bears compare to holding Wang Dong's hand? The little bears had black fur at the start, but their fur was already tinged with dark golden colors. They were extremely strong, but they didn't do anything at all when they were in Hua Yuhao's embrace. They were meaty and pudgy, and it didn't feel that bad to carry them around. Their luck finally turned for the better as they ventured deeper into the Great Star Do Forest. They met the occasional soul beast on their journey in, some relatively powerful. However, most of them weren't aggressive, and Hua Yuhao directed everyone to deliberately evade those soul beasts with spiritual detection. They didn't encounter much trouble along the way. They traveled for 6 hours, and it was almost midday before everyone stopped to rest. Wang Chua was still at the front, and her face had become a little pale. She was still quite a ways away from her peak condition. Wang Donga took the initiative to pass her the rations that Hua Yuhao and she had brought. Wang Chua didn't reject it, and she had a few bites before she began to rest on the ground with her legs crossed. Hua Yuhao remained on the spot and scanned the vegetation around him as a contemplative look appeared in his eyes. What can you see? Cai Maya came beside him with a smile on her face. Hua Yuhao answered, the vegetation here is denser than before. Furthermore, I can tell that it is quite old, far more primitive than the vegetation outside. This place is truly uninhabited and untainted by humans. If I'm not wrong, we should be extremely close to the Great Star Do Forest's core region. Am I right? Cai Maya nodded approvingly and said, yes, we are nearing the core region's outer areas. We will be heading inside the core region if we move forward, the Great Stardow Forest's most dangerous region. The fearsome beasts residing within the slaughtering grounds will occasionally roam the core region, and that's why everyone has to be as careful as you guys can be. Choa is doing a good job leading the way, and we are moving faster than I thought. We will reach the core region within 2 hours. Look at this snake dragon orchid, it's at least a few thousand years old, and it definitely won't appear in the relatively deeper areas. The reason for that is because low-tier soul beasts are very drawn to the snake dragon orchid, and they will all definitely be eaten. The fact that they're still around in these parts proves that nobody here needs them, while the soul beasts that need them don't dare to come into this region. Everyone except for Wang Choa took turns resting and standing guard after they finished their meals. They rested for an especially long time, as their subsequent journey would be even harder than before. Everyone took about an hour to return to their peak condition before Cai Maya gave the order to continue. The vegetation became denser and more obvious the deeper they went. Because of the towering ancient trees, some of the canopies were so compact that it felt like nighttime, while the life energy in the air became conspicuously thicker. Hua Yuhao could clearly feel that the energy of heaven and earth was vaster here. Any soul master would boost their cultivation to the best possible state if they could cultivate in this place for a sufficient period of time. It was a pity that nobody chose this area to cultivate, as it was simply too dangerous. Wang Choa began to slow down even more than before. She scanned the plants and vegetation around her from time to time, as if she were looking for something. Hua Yuhao hugged the 2 little bears as he raised spiritual detection to the largest possible area without using his Eye of Destiny. Woo, woo. One of the small bears rubbed itself against his chest and moaned as if it were trying to be sassy. It was sleeping extremely soundly. Hua Yuhao was a little exasperated with these 2 fellows. He was almost convinced that they shouldn't be dark golden terraclaw bears, but pigs. During their midday rest, the 2 bears finished the same amount of food as everyone else combined. Fortunately, the company had brought along the wolf ape's meat that had been processed properly for the bears. The 2 bears climbed unglamorously all over Hua Yuhao once they finished their meal, and started drooling as they fell sound asleep again. It felt as if they were trying to rely on Hua Yuhao as much as they could. It was fortunate that their saliva didn't smell strange, or not even Wang Donga would want to come near him. Hua Yuhao had been observing their transformations this whole time. He had to admit that it wasn't just luck that dark golden terraclaw bears reached the apex of the soul beast hierarchy. These 2 bears were born not too long ago, but their rate of growth outstripped that of humans. They began to take longer and more drawn-out breaths after just 1 day, and managed to open their eyes, while their strength increased continuously. Furthermore, the immense life energy in their bodies nourished their bodies like a spouting geyser. According to Shrek Academy's records, dark golden terraclaw bears grew up the fastest during their first year. They would grow to about 2 meters tall after their first year, and would possess fearsome fighting strength. They would enter a plateau in growth afterwards, and their growth speed would be normal. However, they were complete carnivores, and their abilities would be boosted in tandem with the strength of the soul beasts they consumed. A dark golden terraclaw bear with 3,000 years of cultivation was often not even 1,000 years old, because it relied on consuming other soul beasts to boost its own strength. Naturally, the prerequisite was that they didn't meet any soul beasts more powerful than they were, as there were hardly any mighty soul beasts that would just let them grow up. Hua Yuhao hadn't thought about how he was going to settle these 2 fellows. He was probably going to let them live in Shrek Academy, and perhaps they could even become Shrek Academy's secret weapons. Of course, that meant they had to be obedient enough. The 2 bears slept even better and more deeply than before once they officially entered the core region. If their parents had been alive, this would have been the place where they should have resided. They were definitely more comfortable in this place, and these fellows' life energies were greatly boosted as they were baptized by the Great Stardow Forest's core region and the ample life energy contained within. There were far fewer soul beasts in the core region, compared to the hybrid region. The soul beasts that could inhabit the core region were almost all top-tier ones, and most of these soul beasts either lived alone or with a small family. These soul beasts were typically formidable and arrogant at the same time, and hardly any would choose to live in a group. Several relatively powerful soul beasts would mark their own territories within the core region, and both humans and soul beasts that dared to enter their territory would be deemed enemies and assaulted instantly. This was the reason why most soul beasts rarely entered the core region unless they believed they were powerful enough, as they could easily find themselves in fatal trouble. Wang Choa continued in for roughly an hour before she switched directions. She didn't move deeper into the core region anymore, and started moving horizontally. The area of the core region was far smaller than the hybrid region. With this company's abilities, they wouldn't even need half a day to reach the slaughtering grounds if they ran with all they had. This was naturally just a hypothetical situation, and would only happen in theory. The humans that dared to try this all became part of the forest's nutrients. A deep and angry roar rang out in the distance. Wang Choa immediately halted in her tracks and listened intently. Hua Yuhao's spiritual detection had yet to reach where this roar came from, so nobody could see anything through it. A bright chirp followed immediately afterward. This chirp was a lot sharper and shriller than the previous roar. Hua Yuhao did a quick calculation and said, 15 degrees to the left in front of us. They're about 4 to 5 kilometers away. The two soul beasts' roaring and chirping became more frequent and frustrated as he spoke. A look of delight came over Wang Chua's face. We're lucky. I think we've found what we're looking for. The soul beast making those shrill chirping sounds is our target. I am confident that my ears haven't failed me, and I also believe that it's in conflict with another extremely formidable soul beast. This opportunity is just too advantageous for us. Zhong Lashuan turned around and looked at Cai Maya. The team's leadership naturally shifted to her with a title duoluo around in the company. Cai Maya said, let's not be hasty, we will keep our distance for now. Their battle has yet to begin. We will wait for a while longer so that we don't get caught in the fray. She walked in front of the company as she spoke while her eyes closed into a squint in the direction of those sounds, and she began to listen intently. Boom! The battle had finally begun, and the vigorous explosion could still be clearly heard even though it came from over 4 kilometers away. What was strange was that this sound didn't trigger any hysteria or panic in the area around them. The soul beasts that could live within the core region were not the kind to scurry away in fright. Boom, boom, boom. A series of deep rumbles could be heard. Hua Yuhao glanced at Wang Chua, who wasn't far from his position. Hua Yuhao knew that he could reach that distance with his spiritual detection if he fused his martial soul with Wang Chua's martial soul, and if he also used his Eye of Destiny. Wang Chua also sensed his thoughts and glanced at him, seemingly asking him if he'd really expose their martial soul fusion. Hua Yuhao couldn't decide. Even though Wang Donga was extremely magnanimous, he also understood her very well. Although she'd been convinced, was she really not bothered? As a normal girl, how could she not be? She simply didn't want to put him in a bad position, thus she acted like she wasn't. This was heart-wrenching for her. Hua Yuhao naturally didn't want anything else to affect his relationship with Wang Donga. The noises of battle became louder and louder. Fortunately, the echoes that they heard relayed that the two unknown soul beasts weren't moving around much as they fought. Cai Maya shut her eyes and listened quietly. After a brief moment, she said, they have roughly between 30,000 and 35,000 years of cultivation. They're at least second-grade soul beasts. Soul beasts weren't distinctly separated into grades. It was more so just an appraisal of their innate abilities. Simply put, dark golden terraclaw bears were a clear example of first-grade soul beasts, whereas second-grade soul beasts were still pretty outstanding despite not being the strongest. The wolf apes that Hua Yuhao and Wang Chua had met earlier had possessed great fighting strength. However, they were only truly strong because of their three-way martial soul fusion skill. Solely based on their individual abilities, they were only barely second-grade, even with their instant teleportation factored in. Since Cai Maya had claimed that these two soul beasts were second-grade, and that they also possessed 30 to 35,000 year cultivations, it meant that their cultivations were equivalent to experienced soul sages from the inner courtyard. Even though soul beasts with cultivations from 10,000 to 90,000 years were collectively categorized as 10,000-year soul beasts, there was still a huge gap in their cultivations. The 10,000th, 30,000th, 50,000th, and 70,000th year all represented barriers that soul beasts had to cross. Their abilities also improved significantly when they did so. If these two soul beasts managed to reach 50,000 years of cultivation, they'd be equivalent in strength to soul duoluos. Furthermore, soul beasts were physically stronger than humans. As such, even a soul duoluo would find it difficult to challenge them. Cai Maya said, let's not rush. If I'm not wrong, this is probably a fight for territory. Such a fight will usually last for quite some time. However, it's not a life-and-death battle, they'll probably hold back. We'll dead over when they've depleted more of their strength. They could handle the two soul beasts, but this was still the core region of the Great Stardow Forest. Who knew if a 100,000-year soul beast would suddenly fall from the sky? If something like that happened, they might all die. That was why it was imperative that they ensure everyone was in top condition. Since they were waiting, everyone quickly adjusted their condition. Wang Donga walked up to Wang Chua and smiled at her. Wang Chua thought to herself, why are you smiling at me? She said coldly, is something the matter? Wang Donga shook her head and replied, no, I just wanted to thank you for helping Yuhao find a suitable soul ring. I would also like to apologize for being rude towards you in the past. Wang Chua snorted and said, can't he thank me himself? Are you saying that he needs you to thank me instead? Wang Donga wasn't bothered by her words. She simply chortled and didn't say anything else. Wang Chua naturally stopped talking to her as well. She glanced at Hua Yuhao again, who was standing a short distance away. Currently, Hua Yuhao didn't have the time to thank her. He'd unleashed his spiritual detection and was trying to detect any movement around him. As the team's main control-type soul master, he'd been the busiest person since entering the core region. The two dark golden terraclaw bear cubs were a little clingy. Although Hua Yuhao had put them down, They were now sleeping very comfortably while hugging his thighs. Hua Yuhao was helpless to do anything about it. When he fought later on, he'd have no choice but to treat them as burdens. After pondering for a moment, Hua Yuhao said to Cai Maya, Dean Cai, it shouldn't be a problem if I take out a slightly larger soul tool here, right? Cai Maya was stunned for a moment. Even though she was the dean of the Martial Soul Department, she didn't know much about soul tools. What do you want to take out? Hua Yuhao glanced down and said, these two fellows are too clingy. It won't be convenient if I bring both of them along for the fight later on. We can't freeze them again either. Even if they can recover from it, it'll still be harmful to them. I'd like to put them inside a soul tool and prevent them from running about when they wake up. At the same time, the soul tool will also protect them. Cai Maya said, it shouldn't be a problem as long as you're sure that the soul tool is safe enough. It's also very dangerous for them to be here. Any soul beast that sees them will definitely attack and eat them. Hua Yuhao nodded and replied, don't worry, I won't let them get too far away from me. Once he'd finished speaking, he took a few steps to the side and lifted his left hand towards a slightly spacious area. His starlight sapphire ring shone brightly, and a dim blue light spread through the air. Following this, something huge appeared in front of everyone. It was a huge ball-shaped entity with 8 long legs. The ball-shaped entity was 2 meters in diameter, and had a very strange metallic luster on its golden body. What's this? Everyone present was stunned by its appearance. They'd never seen a soul tool of this scale before. Hua Yuhao smiled slightly and said, this is called an all-terrain exploration soul tool. I learned how to use it in the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineering Academy. Our academy has the blueprint for it too. However, I also made one for myself, and added some stuff that I've personally researched to it. He grabbed the 2 cubs and walked towards the all-terrain exploration soul tool after he'd finished explaining. When he looked at it, Hua Yuhao couldn't help but think of Juzi and Cuckoo. All 3 of them had sat in a similar soul tool to explore the Jingyang mountain range before. This all-terrain exploration soul tool had been completed by Hua Yuhao and included some of the elements of the Tang sect's hidden weapons. Not only did that mean less formation arrays were required, but it also meant that it was more flexible when controlled. Hua Yuhao had also used the best materials he had to create it. It was now at the standard of a Class 6 soul tool, with its defense close to that of a Class 7 soul tool. Hua Yuhao leapt into the soul tool and the opening closed behind him. When he poured his soul power into it, the soul tool stood up, its legs extending and retracting a few times. A barrier then shone around it as he continued to pour his soul power into it. Everyone present was curious when they saw this interesting soul tool. They'd seen soul tools used to carry people before, but this was the first time they'd seen a soul tool that both completely covered a soul master and appeared mobile. Hua Yuhao's voice resonated from the soul tool, when this fight is over, whoever's interested in the all-terrain exploration soul tool can come try it out. It can hold 3 people. It was evidently not suitable for them to try it out right now. After all, they were soul masters. It would be easier for them to show off their abilities outside of it. The soul tool's legs started to move under Hua Yuhao's control. It only took a few steps for it to reach the spot where Hua Yuhao had been initially. Meanwhile, Hua Yuhao's spiritual detection hadn't been affected at all. He was still using it from inside. Cai Maya sighed in her heart. It seems like the era of soul tools is about to arrive. In fact, both she and Yang Shaozhe had known that soul tools were bound to come into the limelight as advancements and developments continued to be made. However, that didn't mean they were willing to be replaced by soul tools. This was also what many soul masters thought. Soul engineers were simply going to become more and more powerful as soul tools evolved. In the near future, the world might belong to soul engineers. As for pure soul masters like them, they were likely to be eliminated. Before the Sun Moon continent had arrived, the Doluo continent had measured an empire's strength based on the number of soul masters and titled Duluos it had. However, the use of soul masters on a battlefield had diminished greatly as soul engineers demonstrated their power. Long-range soul tools were particularly problematic for soul masters. No matter how strong a soul master was, he couldn't deal with long-range attacks if they were too overwhelming. This was the key difference between cold weapons and firearms. The Heavenly Soul Empire, Doling Empire, and Star Luo empires were all very strong. Yet, why had their progress in developing soul tools been so slow over the last few thousand years? Was it because their resources weren't as vast as the Sun Moon empires? The Sun Moon Empire was around the same size as the Star Luo Empire. Furthermore, resources could be bought even if they couldn't be snatched. In reality, the 3 empires had lagged behind the Sun Moon Empire in terms of soul tool development because their respected soul masters had mounted too much pressure and affected the development of soul tools and engineers in their respective empires. This had also been the case for Shrek Academy. It was like a small empire that held an enormously respectable position on the continent. If Elder Mu hadn't decided that Shrek Academy should start putting more focus on its soul tool department before he passed away, the development of soul tools in the academy was likely to have stalled even longer. This video will end here. Thank you for watching.